This is great. This is great. Well, it's just great because I know that your addition to Texas Frightmare came in like what, last week, 2 weeks ago, I think. When it was announced you were coming, so it was just great.
Yes, yeah. I was a late
addition. But thank you so much. You and I actually spoke, I'd say about 8 years ago. I was working for Fangoria. By the way, welcome to Texas Frightmare. I'm your host, Brian Turek. Shockwaves, Blumhouse. You saw me at Chucky. When I was working at Fangoria, and you had a great biography come out. Can you just talk about it?
That long ago.
Yeah.
I think that was 2006 or 2007.
I know. What was the name? It was
Well, it's named after the song that I sang. I was the original Rizzo in the first Broadway production of Grease, and that song in the second act. There are worse things I could do, I ripped that off for my memoir.
Yeah, and it was. How many of you have read her memoir? Anybody else? You guys have to pick this thing up. It's really great. Did you ever have any feedback from that after it was out?
Actually, it made the LA Times bestseller list. I didn't make New York, but I made LA, and I just put together just in the last month. A sort of one-woman show based on the stories in the book, because I realized, I love doing Q&As at the cons, and everybody wants to hear about John and George and Wes and all of the movies, and so I took it on stage.
You were, I saw that. I was actually in North Hollywood going to see A Quiet Place, and I looked across the street, and you were on the marquee.
I was there.
And I said, how the hell could I have missed this? And what take me inside, what were you, so what do you do? Is it like just a spoken word?
Well, I had been approached by the producers. They wanted me to do a one-woman show, singing and dancing and all of that, and I was in the middle of, I did a series of films last year, like 7 films in a row. Some of them were just cameos, but I thought I don't have the time, and I don't want to spend the money putting the music together and everything, but I love doing the Q&A, so I thought, well, why don't we work with that
format,
and we put together some great video.
Oh, that's cool.
I've got a scene there from John's first union film, Someone's Watching Me, which some of you may know, but most people haven't seen. And just a lot of great stills, I hope, and 1 or 2 songs. And so that's what it was.
That's great.
Real easy.
Are you going to, you're taking it around, what's that, are you still, is there another city coming up? Or?
I've got an offer for Provincetown.
Okay.
We'll see if that works out, and we'll see if anybody else cares.
Yeah. I'm sure they do. It's fun talking to you, because my first introduction to your work was Swamp Thing. And this week, they announced James Wan is rebooting Swamp Thing as a TV show.
Tell the truth. It was the original DVD, right? That's
the original VHS?
The original VHS.
Oh, that DVD. Yes. Let's start there. I mean, we could bounce all over the place and talk about various parts in your body of work. But let's start with Wes. I mean, I had known him through just work stuff, and he was one of the kindest guys ever. I mean, talk about your first introduction to Wes, your first meeting.
Oh, my first meeting, whoa. It must have been on the set, because I'm sure I didn't meet him before we all went to Charleston, South Carolina. My clearest memory really is not so much about Wes, but it was about reading the original screenplay, because the original screenplay was just absolutely wonderful. And I remember thinking, this could be really, a really great film. And unfortunately, they kept pulling the budget out from under him, and he had to throw out entire scenes, eliminate characters. We showed up on the set one day, and there was no makeup trailer because they hadn't paid the bills.
Oh my God.
And he was really...
Do you remember what the initial budget was?
Oh, excuse me, somebody's calling. I knew I should have shut it off. Let me at least silence it.
I love your ringtone, by the way.
Oh, well, forget you.
We can just include them in, throw them into the Q&A.
You know what? If it's my kids, I recognize them. They can wait.
But I was wondering, do you remember what the ambition was for Swamp Thing in terms of budget level?
Oh, no,
No,
I don't.
yeah.
I just remember what did they call him? The completion guarantor?
Oh, yes,
Who
yes,
is
yes.
the guy that, handles the books.
Yeah.
Cast himself in one of the roles. It's been so many years since I've seen the film, I can't remember what role it would have been, but he was probably wearing a suit.
Yeah.
And so he was there all the time, and executives were flying in, and it was rough working conditions anyway.
Yeah.
So we were working 12 and 14 hours a day, so I wasn't paying attention to too much, but I do remember people coming in and saying, we can't do that scene, and we were using, I remember there was I think I say it in the book. If I'd known you were going to ask these questions after, I think they had one Jeep and it needed a new battery, and so the Jeep wouldn't work, and they were having to push it by hand. I mean, it was a nightmare.
Oh my God.
But throughout it all, Wes was just a quiet gentleman. I never lost it.
Right.
It was not an easy experience for me.
Well, in tough productions like that, cast and crew tend to come together off screen. Did you guys form a nice camaraderie off screen during your off days?
Unfortunately, they put me in a sort of a nicer hotel, and everybody else was someplace else, and I kept thinking I'd rather be over there with those guys but I was working such long hours I didn't have time to socialize much anyway. Dick Turek and Ray Wise. I just did another film with Ray.
Oh, nice. Which one?
It's called The Chain. It's directed by a wonderful Spanish director named David Martin Perez.
Okay.
And it was Ray Wise and Madeline Zima, who I believe is with Ray in Twin Peaks, and John Patrick Amadori.
Okay.
And Ray is so good. We play husband and wife. So, of course, Ray and I became friends. Dick was a wonderful man. I had a little problem with David Hess, throwing me around.
I was going to say, can you elaborate a little bit?
I just, come on, David, let's act instead of, you don't have to throw me on the ground. It was, there were a lot of drugs on the set, people getting arrested, so it was an interesting experience.
Wow. And then you've got, obviously you brought up John as well. God, I don't even know where to begin with that. What was your first encounter with John like?
My first encounter with John, I got a call from my agent saying there was this hot young movie director who was doing a television film. I think by that time they knew that it was going to be for television. I believe he had written it initially for a feature, but Warner Brothers wanted it for TV. And so I went in for an interview, or he said he wants you for one of the roles. So I went in to meet John, and what I could see through the cigarette smoke, I thought, this is a very attractive attractive guy. And the role that he was offering me was, she was a lesbian. I think it was probably the first time anyone had played a lesbian on network television, certainly. This was in 1978. And so when we started talking about the role, John said something like, well, if I were going to let my friends know that I was gay, I would, I'd probably do this and this and this. And I thought, oh, shoot, he's gay. Forget that, And then I found out very soon after that he was not.
But was he, riding on some success and being that hot young director?
No, I don't, he was not. In his mind, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think he was very, I would never say, he was never nervous, I'm only supposing this because I realized it was his first union film. We shot it in 10 days. It was not the way he was used to working. He wasn't working with his own crew or his own AD or anything like that. So I'm sure that, he was feeling the pressure. I was never aware of it. And of course I didn't know him at all, but he, and I tell this story in the one-woman show. He gave me the best piece of advice that I'd had up until that point. I started out on stage. I was one of the daughters in Fiddler on the Roof, and then I did Grease, and Grease led to Maude, and so up until 1978, when I worked with John for the first time, I'd only done stage and television, and most of the television was sitcom, which is done again with a live audience. I did a lot of TV movies and guest stars and everything, but we did the first scene in Someone's Watching Me, and John came over and he said, that was great, do less. And I thought, do less? I said, do less? He said, yeah, just do less. And it was the proverbial light bulb going off, because suddenly it was like, oh, okay, I get it, I understand. And that carried me through until I went to work for George Romero, and he said, do more. But I owe John that. I definitely owe John that. I owe John my feature career, actually, or at least my career in horror, because in 1978, if you were doing a television show, you could not get seen for a feature film. The producers all felt that nobody would pay to see you in a movie theater if they were seeing you for free every Tuesday night. And it was John who wrote The Fog and asked me to be in it. And I said, a ghost story? It's not China Syndrome, I mean, I was heavy into social significant episodes, having come off of Maude. But I think in part because, and if he had not offered me that role, who knows how long it would have been before I would have gotten a feature. And then I think in part because my first film was The Fog, which was a genre film, and in part because by that time John and I were a couple, I sort of got labeled, I went from being, oh, she's a musical comedy star, to she's a TV actress, to she's a comedian, to, oh, she's a horror film actress, you know, and so I don't mind.
Yeah, that's great. Well, how did your working relationship go with John? I mean, did he include you more in terms of creative process at all? I mean, going from Fog, Escape,
I think I wrote 2 lines in The Fog.
Do you remember what they were?
I remember at the time saying to him, what about this? I'd have to go back and look. But I had already worked with him, on Someone's Watching Me. And so I knew him first as a director, and then, of course, as a romance. But when time came to do The Fog, we only had one disagreement. It was the scene where the board catches fire, the driftwood catches fire. And we finished it came right after that scene. I'd have to see the movie to remember exactly what it was. But John said to me, okay, sit down and we'll shoot. And I said, sit down? Oh, John, I don't think she'd sit down. She's too upset. He said, okay, stand up and we'll shoot. That was the end of it. We were pretty much, he wrote the role with me in mind, so we were pretty much on the same wavelength.
That's cool.
And John knew what he wanted as a director. There was very little, even on Escape. I remember Harry Dean. Harry Dean wanted to, fuss with some of the lines, and John was pretty much, we're not ad-libbing here. He knew what he wanted, and he knew how to get it.
When you were coming up, you talk about a key piece of advice that John gave you. Was there anybody in your really early days, that helped you steer your career into the right direction and coming up as an actress?
No.
You're completely on your own?
Completely on my own. I mean, I started doing musical comedy when I was in high school, just community theater. The community theater that I was involved with was a very multi-million-dollar organization, and they had a musical comedy review group. And when I was in high school, we applied to the State Department and were chosen to go overseas to entertain armed forces. So I finished high school, and the following week, 18 of us left for 3 months in what in those days was called the Orient, Southeast Asia. We were right on the DMZ.
Oh, wow.
They killed a couple of guys that had been at one of our shows, the North Koreans did. We were on an atomic testing center, an island in the middle of the South Pacific. Wow. We were all over Japan and Okinawa and Taiwan, just doing musical comedy review for the GIs. And then I came back and I started college, and there was nobody in my family I didn't know anybody in the industry, and it never crossed my mind that you could do this for a job, for a career. This was just something that was joyful. But then I did a show with an actress who had been in New York and had been in an off-Broadway show. And she said, you ought to go to New York and study, because that's where all the great teachers are, the voice teachers or the acting teachers and everything. I thought, oh, okay, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
So I just packed my bags and went to New York and thought if I'm not earning a living, by the time I'm 25, I'll go back and get my degree and teach.
Yeah.
And
was there a certain discipline that you learned through being on stage that you helped apply to screen? Because some people would go out and they jump right onto TV or right into film, but you came up through stage, which a lot of people do. But,
I did, and I got my union card
Yeah.
being an apprentice in a summer stock theater for 5 months in Augusta, Michigan, where I was performing every night, but during the day we were building the sets and we were painting the scenery, and I was babysitting for the producer's kid, and I think between that and just the fact of starting out as a stage actor, there's a certain, not only is there a certain discipline that you learn, but there is a certain appreciation that you learn for the role that everyone else plays when you get on a set. I'm always aware when I'm signing out at maybe 10 o'clock at night that the crew is going to be there for another hour or 2 hours, and they've come in an hour before I have. And so, you don't take everybody else's part in the process for granted.
Yeah.
And I think that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, there are a lot of people who go from stage to television or film and don't have a problem, but it is oftentimes harder for a film actor. Or I remember when we were doing Maude, Van Johnson came in to do a guest role. You're all probably too young to know who Van Johnson was, but he's a famous actor from the 30s or 40s or whatever he was. And the guy couldn't memorize 2 lines. We were doing it like a play, He had to have cue cards.
Oh, wow.
It was a big shock to me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a big star,
Yeah.
Well, the Duke came in and he didn't memorize his lines either, but we forgave him for that.
Obviously everybody's here because we're at a horror convention. You're known quite a bit for your genre contributions. Did you grow up, keeping tabs on the horror films that were around? Were you ever a horror fan yourself?
I've never even seen Psycho. I laughed at The Exorcist. The first horror film. No, I do remember seeing Donovan's Brain when that did stay in my mind. But the first real remembrance I have of a horror film was the night that I announced my engagement to John on Johnny Carson's show, and then he screened Halloween. And I had Tommy Atkins with me, and his wife at the time, Darn Stevens, who you might know from Halloween 3 if you're really fanatics. And I was there and sitting next to John and watching this movie and going, oh my God, oh my, and by the time it was over, John was black and blue. I swore I'd never see another horror film. And Tommy said to Garn, we can't let her marry this guy. So I don't like to see them. I love to do them, but I'm not...
Well, I think that's good because, I mean, it's just personal experience you can bring to the role. It makes it feel grounded and fresh, as opposed to thinking about all the horror movies that are out there. Were there any projects that you and John were potentially going to do that never came to be?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah.
No, I don't. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I was offered a role in a film. The agents again said this is a big time musician or something. He's got a band or something, but he's doing this film. And they sent it over, and I read 20 pages, and there's no way, I can't do this. I mean, this is just vile. You know, this is just, there's no way I'm doing this. And I sent it back. I never even finished reading it. And about a year later, I was at a convention, and Bill Moseley was there. Bill and I had done Carnivale together. Mm-hmm. And Bill had a line of people signing that was going out the door, you know. It was comparable to George sometimes. I said, Bill, this is fantastic. What are they signing? What did you do? Devil's Rejects. And that's what I had rejected. But I don't know, you know, I've got 2 kids, or I have 3,
Yeah.
but at the time they were little, and I said, this is not the kind of thing I want them to see mommy and daddy.
What was speaking of your kids, what was the first film that you had ever shown them that you had done?
That's another mistake. The night that Carnivale premiered, I had some friends over to watch, and all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, what am I going to do with the kids? You know, they can't watch this. Well, I'll put them to bed and I'll put on a comedy. What have I got? Oh, I'll put on Cannonball Run. I don't know if they were 6 or 7, I'm not sure. And so they watched the movie. I'm watching, you know, the Carnivale, and I went back upstairs, and Walker was crying because Jack Elam's eye had stayed. And William was, Mom, how could you do that in front of that policeman? Mom, don't ever do that again. And they could care less about seeing anything else. You know? I keep forcing them. I want them to watch The Convent.
Yeah.
Because I think I don't know if any of you have seen The Convent, but if you haven't, it's a very funny you know, horror film.
It's on Amazon Prime right now. This is the Mike
really?
Mendes. Yeah, because when Mike was very excited when it was on Amazon Prime.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'll have to.
Yeah.
It's just silly. It's just ridiculous. But it won a lot of awards, and but you know, I can't get these guys to watch. You know, they've never seen Maude. They could care less about, you know. Yeah. I think they've seen Escape from New York, and maybe they've seen Creepshow. But
Oh my God. We'll talk about finding the Billy character in Creepshow and how George helped you out. Let's talk about that experience.
Well, again, that was another script that I was sent, and I read it, and I said, I can't do this. This is, you know, this is really vile and gory, and it's, you know. And of course, John is saying to me, and I didn't know who George Romero was. I was not a fan of the genre at that time. And John is saying, are you kidding? You're going to turn down an opportunity to work with a master of horror? And I don't. But Tommy Atkins had already been cast, and he was a very close friend. So I called Tom, and I said, Tom, you're doing this thing? I mean, it's really bloody and, you know, whatever I was thinking at the time. He said, oh, no, Adrienne, you know, it's going to be it's stylized, and you've got to do it, and it's going to be a cartoon, and blah, 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 and do it. Okay. Well, I don't drink. I've never liked it, you know, and so I've never been drunk, and I thought, oh, you know, and I think I showed up on the set, and I said to George, you know, if you don't like what I'm doing, you better send me home, because I'm not sure what I'm doing. And she's really George's creation, because he just kept saying, you can do it, you can go bigger, you can go bigger. But John says, But she was great fun, and
Did Hal Holbrook, working with him, help draw that out at all, or?
did he help draw it out? I think what really makes her work is, at least for me, and I think you'll find this from almost any actor who plays something that's so, outrageous like that, or a villain or anything, is you can't just say, oh, she's a bitch and I'm going to play her like a bitch. You have to understand what makes her like that. And for me, Billy was really disappointed in the way her life had turned out. She married this guy that she thought was going to be this, everybody was going to be kowtowing to this professor, and she was going to have this wonderful life in academia, and he couldn't wipe his ass, and disappointed, and life hadn't turned out the way she wanted it to be. And I think that's what gave rise to her, certainly to her drinking probably, but also to her anger and her bitchiness. He let her down.
Yeah. Was it fun? Take us on the day where there was, Tom Savini, the makeup effects that day. Were you looking forward to that, or was it just like, oh man?
Oh, I hate to disappoint you. I don't remember.
No, that's okay.
The whole thing was great fun.
Oh, I'm sure.
I loved George. I met him when I got to Pittsburgh, and I loved him and his wife at the time, Christine Forrest, who's also in the film, and Ed Harris was on the set, and Stephen. We all had dinner together right before. I loved Pittsburgh. I just had a great time. It was wonderful.
In terms of looking at, John and George and Wes, did they have a distinctive way at approaching a production? Did they each have their own ways, or was it just kind of business as usual? In terms of handling the creative and handling the production and taking charge?
I don't know what Wes's approach was, as well as I know John and George.
Yeah.
Because he was having
up
to do so much on
challenges.
the fly. But I remember, and I know this about John, and I think I know this about George. They knew what they wanted. They were prepared. There was no last minute decisions, and they knew their craft. Yeah. And have you noticed, you've been working with a lot of new filmmakers, a lot of new horror directors. I have.
What are you seeing? Are you seeing any similarities or differences in terms of how they're approaching the genre versus the veterans that you've worked with?
Okay, let me think about this genre, because I am thinking about a couple that I just worked with who were really reliant upon their DPs for a lot.
Yes.
Even for blocking and things, and that was sort of took me back. I don't know if John and George did storyboards in those days. I seem to think they might have.
Yeah. Although that is telling that a lot of them are relying on crew to kind of help fulfill their vision.
And
That's interesting, huh? Well, the Convent was a blast to watch. How many of you guys have seen The Convent? Yeah? Again, see it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's colorful. It's crazy. It's bloody. It's full of neon-y goop. But working with Mike, I'm sure it was a blast.
Great.
Yeah.
He was great. And, I sort of felt like I was going in to do my version of Snake.
That's pretty much it, yes.
It was, and there I got to write some of those lines, Virgins. It's always something with virgins.
What was your, looking back, what was your favorite collaborative experience, be it a filmmaker or an actor? And it doesn't have to be confined to horror.
My favorite collaborative experience? Well, it may have been George. It's hard for me to remember specifics, but I do, I know he had a lot in her. you know, even if it was just in saying, yeah, go ahead and be bigger. One of my favorite work experiences was Carnivale.
Yeah.
And it was just such a fantastic, it was just a great job on all levels. I loved the people and the writing and the location and the caterers. I mean, it was just...
Why did that come to an end? I've forgotten. Do you know? Do you know the true story?
I know what I think.
Yeah.
There were several elements. It was an expensive show to produce.
Sure, yeah.
Because it takes place in the 30s, and they had to do a lot of, you know, getting rid of telephone lines and things like that. HBO was just coming off of Sopranos, and they wanted Sopranos kinds of numbers. And we were much more of a niche audience.
Yeah.
I think had we gone a third season, we would have really found it. The producer was not a politician. He was not a television, you know, he didn't, I don't know how much even experience he'd had with television. And so there were politics involved.
Yeah.
And in the end, they said it just came down to, it cost too much money to do it, and they weren't getting the numbers that they wanted to spend that kind of money.
Do you think it would have found a wider audience, not just today, you know, the HBO viewers, but on the political side over at HBO, if it had come out today as opposed to then? I mean, like, we're now living this kind of golden age of television, you know?
Yes. I think that, and I'd have to sit down and look at a list, but I think that so many of the shows that we've seen since we went off in 2005, I think, since then, were a direct result of Carnivale.
Oh, absolutely,
you know, Lost, I mean, all of the metaphysical things that we're seeing now, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of shows today owe that to Carnivale for sure.
Yeah.
Let's open it up to the audience. Anybody have any questions? Right here.
So you went from stage to film. Did you have a problem not having an audience to react to?
Well, I went from stage to TV with Maude, where we did have an audience still. And my first film experience, I think the very first one, was a Quincy. But no. Well, maybe that Quincy came first, but I did a TV movie called Houdini with Paul Michael Blaser and the woman who plays Ethel Mertz, his name I can never remember, on I Love Lucy, Vivian Vance. And I did not grow up going to the movies, and I was not very educated in filmmaking or anything. So we did the first shot, The Master, which I'm sure all of you know what a master is. You know, the big shot that shows the whole scene and everything. We did The Master, and I went back to my dressing room and changed for the next scene. And the AD showed up and he said, "Okay, well, we're ready for the close-ups." And I thought, close-ups? What is he? You know? I didn't know. I
completely changed for the next scene.
I didn't know they shot close-ups. I didn't know they shot over the shoulders or medium close-ups or anything. So it took a little while.
That's great. Anybody else? Way in the back.
So Carnivale is one of my favorite shows of all time for sure. Is there any was there a favorite experience, a favorite memory you had from that? I know it's a broad statement, but I'm curious.
Well, my favorite memory was dancing with the snakes, because that damn snake decided to deposit his pre-digested rat every time I put him on my shoulders. And the wrangler had told me, oh, they only go to the bathroom once a month, you know. Not this one. And I finished one scene where it was about 5 hours of starting on the ground with, it was about 15 pounds. And, standing up and doing the dancing and everything. And by the end of the day, I thought, oh, I must have pulled a muscle. Well, 2 days later, I was getting an MRI because I chipped a disc. And it was right before I was going to shoot my very first ever love scene with Mick Stahl. I mean, I'd only done Swamp Thing up until that point, in terms of a love scene.
Yeah.
And I was determined that I was going to have nice lingerie, because I didn't know what I was going to be wearing in this scene. But I could barely walk. I couldn't get out of the car. I was just in tears trying to get the kids into the car and get them to school and everything. But I took myself to the department store, and it took me about 5 hours to try on a couple of pair of, nice underwear to go and do this love scene. Then time came to do the love scene, and the director, who hadn't been with us until that week, said, okay, well, I want you to start up here, and you'll embrace, and then you'll sit down, and you'll roll over. And I said, I can't do any of it. I can't sit down. I'm going to have to start, stretched out, and then hold my breath while I'm rolling over or whatever. So that's what I remember.
Oh my God. I'm sure Nick was gentle.
Nick was lovely. He was just, you couldn't have asked for anyone better.
Any other questions? Right here?
Do you remember when you talked about Bill Moseley doing the Devil's Rejects and all that, you read the script. It was vile, but do you remember what role you were reading for?
I only read 20 pages, but I think it might have been, did Priscilla Barnes do a role that I might have been right for? I think maybe that's who it would have been. She seemed like the only one that I knew that might be my age and sort of a similar type or something.
Interesting. Right there in the room. That's it.
Can you talk a little bit about what it showed?
What it was like doing Creepshow.
Well, more than what I've said, I don't know. Let's see. It was great fun. What else do I remember?
When did that segment come into the production schedule? Do you remember? Like how did they shoot? Yeah, I was just curious about how they.
I think EG was after us.
Yeah.
Because I remember them talking about, or maybe it was before, because I remember them talking about some of the roaches had gotten out. they had been imported from Latin America or something.
Did other cast members from the other segments come by sets while you guys were shooting, or did you go visit at all?
No. When we all first met, Ed was there, Ed Harris was there, and Amy was with him, and Stephen was there.
Yeah.
I've often heard Tom Atkins say, the first question Stephen asked was, what's Jamie Lee Curtis really like? And what you may not know, I just found this out when I was doing a signing for one of my vampire novels. There was another author there. We were at the San Diego Comic Con. We were doing a horror author signing, and there was another author there, a young man, came up and he said, I don't know if you remember me, but my name is Joe Hill.
Oh, God. Yeah.
But I'm Stephen's son, and I played Tommy's son in the movie.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, if you watch Creepshow again, when you see the interstitials with Tom Atkins yelling at his kid, that is
little baby Joe Hill.
In those days, he was Stephen Hill, or Stephen King. He was that's Stephen's son, Joe King, in those days, who's grown up to have his own incredible.
No, he's a fantastic writer. Fantastic. Yeah, right here.
Adrienne, were there drugs on the set of a Match Game or Sha-Na-Na? and did Richard Dawson or John Bowser try to make a passage?
Oh boy, I'm hard pressed to remember.
Did Mr. Dawson try to kiss you?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Right up here. Yeah.
Yes. What was it like working on Swamp Thing?
Swamp Thing was hard. It was hard. It was hard for several reasons. One of which I've talked about, which they kept losing their budget. But it was we were in the swamps. We were based in Charleston, but I think the swamps were called Cypress Gardens, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell? Or Magnolia Gardens? Were there two?
Cypress,
Cypress Gardens, and it was buggy and hot, and there were chiggers and ticks and gators, which I never realized, so I was never worried. It was my first experience doing, any kind of stunt work. And again, not growing up watching movies, I was like, oh, well, yeah, I can do these stunts. Well, and I remember the stuntmen, 2 of whom had legs that looked like chopped hamburger meat because they had been, in accidents and doing fire stunts. And we did have, one of our stuntmen had just developed a gel to do fire stunts, and so they were trying that out. But I remember him saying to me, there was a shot where I'm running and I guess the Jeep is chasing me. And he said to me, if you trip or fall, just stay where you are and we won't run over you. That's a possibility.
All right. All right then. That's great. Yeah, right here.
Vampires of Hollywood, any further motion towards another book?
Well, I wrote Love Bites, which was the sequel to Vampires of Hollywood, and then I wrote Make Me Dead, which was only published as an ebook. So that's not available hardbound or anything. And that sort of finished the trilogy. But Love Bites was optioned by Harrison Smith, who just has Death House coming out, or I guess it's just been released.
Yeah.
And after he optioned it, then he approached me about co-writing the screenplay. So we co-wrote the screenplay to Love Bites. It won't be called Love Bites. And he's looking for the financing now, so maybe it'll be a film. We'll see.
I'm talking about some of the, you had mentioned the film that you just finished with Ray Wise. What else do you have coming up?
Okay, let's see. I did Rance Howard's last film.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was just a cameo, but I got to work with Rance again. We had worked together years ago.
Yeah.
And that is sort of a buddy movie bank heist with Rance and Michael, oh my God. This is terrible. My mind is just going blank.
Well,
he's directed me in 3 films, and my mind is going blank. Michael,
Yeah.
come on, Michael. Oh well, it'll come.
Yeah, I'll get
Anyway,
it.
so that's that one, and that is called Appleseed.
Okay.
And I suspect it's going to be a really lovely, not a genre film,
Yeah.
but. Then I did a golf comedy with Dan Lauria.
Okay. Yeah.
Directed by Angela Shelton, who had Tumbleweed, and she's just got another film coming out called Heart Baby,
Okay.
and that stars a Korean K-pop singer,
Oh, wow.
and Dan Lauria. And
Yeah.
again, I just came in for a couple of days on that one. I did a film that will probably go to Lifetime. I just did a film called Big Legend.
Okay.
That was, again, just a cameo, but that's going to be screening at the Seattle Horror Film Festival,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
And another one, again, a cameo called Swell with Dee Wallace's daughter, Gabrielle Stone.
Okay.
And there was something else in all of that. And The Chain, we talked about The
Yeah,
Chain. I
yeah.
think The Chain, I think they have their distribution, I'm not sure. They just
it.
had a screening in LA, and very well, I love the director.
Yeah.
I think we'll be seeing more from him.
I mean, you're doing so much now. Like,
Well-
that is so much. What keeps the excitement going for you?
I love the work.
Yeah.
I really do love the work.
Yeah.
I spent not last year, well, 2015 and 2016, I was doing the national tour of Pippin.
Yeah.
So I was on stage, but I really enjoy myself.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
It's always been fun. Some of them have been harder than others, but I don't feel like I've ever. Oh, I gotta go to work today. You know, it's never felt like that.
Were you ever like that? I mean, like you're using, you're just talking about the books. What was writing to you? I mean, was that just another creative outlet with a little bit more sense of authorship and control, or?
Writing was something I fell into without ever knowing it was going. It was nothing I had ever anticipated doing.
Yeah.
It came about because I felt like I got a a message from a girlfriend of mine who had died, who was telling me that I had to go and take this writing class. I didn't even know people taught writing, but it was a pretty strong message. I don't. How much time have we got? One of my closest friend was a film editor who did Testament and Night Mother, which was directed by the director of Grease.
Yeah.
So it all sort of comes around. But she and I met on the first day of preschool for my older boy, Cody Carpenter.
Yeah.
And we were the closest of friends. And she died in 1998 from breast cancer. And on the first day of preschool for my younger boys, I met a woman walked onto the campus who looked just like my dead friend. And I was sort of taken aback. She said, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
I said, yeah. "You just look like someone I know." She said, "Oh, who?" I said, "Oh, you wouldn't know her. She's a film editor, and she was my closest friend, and she died of breast cancer." And this woman, who looked just like Suzanne Pettit, said, "Oh, well, I'm a film editor, and I have breast cancer. We could be best friends." And so I immediately said, "What are you doing? Let's go have coffee." And in the course of our getting to know each other over this 3-hour coffee, she talked about a writing class that she had attended. And I swear to God, I never thought you could learn how to write.
Yeah.
I had always kept a journal, but I didn't know people taught writing, you know. I figured you were either born Stephen King or you weren't. And as soon as she said it, I thought, you know what? This is Suzanne telling me I've got to go take this class.
Yeah.
And so I did, and if you're going to take a writing class, you've got to write, you know. So I started bringing in homework assignments, writing about the movies or funny things that I thought might have happened, or, you know, John or whatever. And after 6 months, the teacher said, "You need to get an agent because you've got a book here." And that was, there were worse
That's
things
awesome.
I could do.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And then I wrote a series of vampire novels about a scream queen who happens to run a movie studio.
That's awesome.
So.
Yeah, that's great. One more?
One last question, I guess you asked earlier. On the movie Cannonball Run, multi-star cast, everybody driving some real fast cars. Did you volunteer to drive your auto, or did you, I believe it was Susan Anton or Catherine Bach that was your...
No, my partner in
Yes.
the race was an actress named...
I can't remember either.
I would say we could Google that, but I can't get Wi-Fi.
Did y'all actually get to drive those, or was
Well,
those just...
I drove it going out of the scene, and I drove it coming into the scene. But I was too short. I could not reach the pedals on that Lamborghini. And so, you know, I think they put a block, you know, and I'm like this. So we were using stunt drivers. Unfortunately, we had a terrible accident on that set. And one of the stunt girls was paralyzed from the neck down in an auto accident that happened with Roger Moore, with the Aston Martin.
Okay.
And we had another accident where they were just getting ready to start the race, and they had all those antique cars out there, and it had rained the night before. And Hal called places, and this crane, this huge crane that had this huge light, sitting in the wet grass, just went like that and sliced the last Cobra to come off the assembly line in half. And had he called places 1 second earlier, 2 of the guys would have been in the car. But the poor owner of that car was in tears. So it was, yeah.
That's why all the Fast and the Furious movies are CGI. That's why all the Fast and the Furious movies are just CGI cars. Well, Adrienne, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for coming out.